All right, the Philadelphia Eagles take a quarterback, and they take one in the fifth round. Turns out to be Mr. Cole Payton out of North Dakota State, coming in at 6'3", 232. Cole Payton is what are we on, the seventh? He is the seventh quarterback taking in the NFL draft. The Eagles, it's interesting because the Eagles have a pretty crowded quarterback room already. So it's pretty interesting to see them take a quarterback. Obviously, we know Jalen Hurts is the guy, Super Bowl MVP, Super Bowl winning quarterback. Jalen Hurts is the guy, no question about it. So behind him, we have Tanner McKee. We have Kyle McCord, who was taken out of Syracuse this past season, which I actually liked for them last year because he was a very underrated guy. He went to Ohio State and he transferred to Syracuse, and then he balled out of Syracuse and like broke all their records. So I thought that was a pretty sneaky pick getting him last year. So he's on the roster. They also got Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who they got over from the Browns coming out of UCLA. He's a young guy as well. Pretty crowded QB room already. I mean, that's five guys that I just said right there, plus Cole Payton. So that's six quarterbacks now the Eagles have. So, even though Jalen Hurts is the guy, I mean, I did say no question about it earlier. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that because the other people, there probably are questions. There definitely have been people that have said things about Jalen Hurts that are not in the best light, surrounding his performances at times. Now, I'm not saying Jalen Hurts does not have a bad game here and there, but I mean, who doesn't in the NFL? You know what I mean? Like we understand he's not like a Tom Brady type level guy. We get that, but Jalen Hurts is a Super Bowl MVP, Super Bowl winning quarterback. I mean, he's made two Super Bowls. He's definitely in the top half of the league, I would say for sure. So, to me, I don't think there's any question. And but maybe the Eagles are trying to make sure that they're secure behind him, maybe just in case anything happens or, gets hurt or whatever. So, but they already have a very crowded QB room. So interesting to see them take one. Obviously, they're not going to go into the season with six quarterbacks on the roster. So they'll probably trim it down to three or four at most. So a couple of these names probably won't be on the roster come August or September, but Cole Payton goes out of North Dakota State. The next quarterback taken in the sixth round was Taylon Green out of Arkansas. He was a guy that was talked a lot about in college football. He's a huge dude, 6'6", 227. And he's a big bully running the ball too. I saw him a lot at Arkansas, and he gets a shot going to the Cleveland Browns. And obviously the Cleveland Browns, as we know, have one of the more interesting QB rooms in all of football. Shedeur Sanders. I mean, we just talked about him a little earlier, got drafted out of Colorado last year. Did Shedeur go in the fifth round as well? I think he did go in the fifth or sixth round last year, but he was like the number one, number two ranked quarterback in the draft. So that was like the biggest, craziest story that happened in last year's draft, how he went from basically being like a first round pick that everyone thought he was going to be to like the fifth round, which is like no one's ever seen anything like that before. So the drop was crazy, but he did end up getting drafted by the Browns finally. And then last season, we saw a lot of potential with Shedeur in a few games. He showed some flashes, and now it seems like the Browns are trying to look towards him to be the guy. So Shedeur is there. Dylan Gabriel, who was drafted in the same draft last season before Shedeur Sanders. Dylan Gabriel went in the third round last season out of Oregon. And Dylan Gabriel is a story in himself. Started at Central Florida, got hurt, and then transferred to Oklahoma. My Oklahoma Sooners led us for just 1 year maybe. It was 1 or 2 years, but he was there for a short time, led us, and then he transferred over to Oregon and then went on a great run going undefeated and making the playoffs. So Dylan Gabriel got drafted last year as well in the third round. They took two guys last year, and they took Dylan Gabriel first, and he showed some flashes as well. He was able to start like the first few games for them, I believe, and they gave him a shot after Joe Flacco. So Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders are on the roster, both young guys, obviously. Deshaun Watson is still there, one of the craziest stories we've seen in the NFL in the last few years. He's making more money than like 99% of the players in the NFL, yet he hasn't played a game in like 2 years, basically. So it's crazy, but he's still there, obviously, because the contract that he signed is just terrible, and the Browns are stuck with him. But Deshaun Watson's there, and now they draft Taylor Green. So very interesting QB room for the Browns, but they got three young guys out of college. So Deshaun Watson, they're just waiting for him to give him the boot, obviously. But three young guys, and the Browns are basically going overload on the Steelers' strategy, which is throwing a dart at the wall and seeing if one of them sticks. Well, the Browns are doing that more than you could possibly do it. I mean, we saw them have four guys on the roster last year, and now they have this year. So shout out to the Browns. At least they're trying to find a guy, and we'll see what happens with Shador and all the rest of the guys. All right, so the next quarterback taken in the 7th round, the last round in the draft, we saw 3 quarterbacks get taken in the last one. So the next quarterback taken was very interesting to me because I've actually never heard of this guy. I don't want to butcher his name. I'm sorry. He has a tough name. It's Athan Kaliakmenis. Athan Kaliakmenis. Quarterback out of Rutgers, 6'3", 215. Rutgers is a underwhelming college football team. They usually are going about, 3-9, 4-8 year after year. So Rutgers does not have a lot of success in college football, but they do produce some NFL talent. We've seen a lot of NFL talent come out of Rutgers, even going back to guys like the McCourty twins out of Rutgers going to the Patriots, who won a bunch of Super Bowls. And Isaiah Pacheco comes to mind out of Rutgers, Ray Rice out of Rutgers, both great running backs. So Rutgers does produce NFL talent, and they have a quarterback get drafted to the Commanders. The Commanders take a quarterback out of Rutgers, and the QB room for the Commanders is looking like Jaden Daniels, of course, the starter, who is a star, a rising star in the NFL coming out of LSU, young guy. Marcus Mariota, the veteran, backing him up, and Sam Hartman, also a veteran now, coming out of Notre Dame. Or I don't want to say a veteran. Sam Hartman probably got drafted like 2-3 years ago, so he's pretty young too. He is in a third spot, and then Afton is now part of this QB room. So interesting QB room for the Commanders. He looks like he will be battling Sam Hartman for that third string spot. I think Marcus Mariota is pretty solid at the backup spot. So we'll see for Afton, but shout out to Afton going in the 7th round to the Commanders. And the next pick I really like for the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots in the 7th round take Baron Morton, quarterback out of Texas Tech, coming in at 6'2", 221. Baron Morton was one of the better quarterbacks in this past season. Now, before this past season, I hadn't really heard of Baron Morton. I think he started a year before that at Texas Tech. But, Texas Tech really made a splash on the scene this past year, as college football fans know, because Texas Tech invested a huge amount of money into their college football program, and it ended up paying off for them after basically several years of being irrelevant on the national stage. In the Big 12, Texas Tech was not doing much for many years, and then this past year they said, "Hey, we're going big or going home." So they put a lot of money into the NIL, and ended up making them the playoffs this past year. They made the playoff, and even though they lost their first game to Oregon, it was a very good year for them down there in the Big 12, and they end up producing some good NFL talent, including their quarterback, Baron Morton, who led them to the playoff. He balled out this past season. He was very good. The Patriots take him, and the Patriots pretty much needed some guys behind Drake May. Obviously, Drake May is the guy, young guy out of North Carolina who just made the Super Bowl. And Tommy DeVito is on the Patriots roster as a backup. So he's there, and he's a pretty solid backup. But that is it for the Patriots. They have the shortest QB room that I have seen up to this point. I mean, they are the opposite of the Eagles. They only had 2 quarterbacks before they drafted Baron Morton. So they pretty much need a third guy, just to be there. So Baron Morton goes, and I really like this pick because I think he has some really good talent, and I think he could translate to the NFL very well. So the Patriots looks like they got a pretty solid guy to come into the QB room and be the third string guy. And, Drake May is young, so, Baron Morton's probably not going to have much of a future, being a starter in New England. But, we'll see for Baron Morton. Goes in the 7th round to New England. And then the last pick. And is he Mr. Irrelevant? Because it says 3rd round or 33rd pick in the 7th round. Is that Mr. Irrelevant? 33rd pick? Hold on. Let me look that up real quick. But the last quarterback taken is Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback out of LSU, which is a interesting pick to me as well. Who was Mr. Irrelevant? Red Murdoch. Okay, so Garrett Nussmeier was not the last pick in the NFL draft, but he was pretty close because it says he was a compensatory pick. Third in the seventh round, he goes to the Kansas City Chiefs, Garrett Nussmeier. So Garrett Nussmeier, I say, is an interesting story because Garrett Nussmeier, he was seen as probably like projected to be like a top NFL draft pick like this past season, before this past season. You know, he kind of had the Carson Beck type of story where he was seen as like a top guy and all of a sudden it just fell apart. Drew Aller too, you know, top guy and then it just fell apart this past season. This past year, his performance basically dropped. Like he went from balling out at LSU to this past year. He did not have a good year at all. And LSU did not have a good year either. You know, I think they barely made a bowl game. They went like 6-6. And I believe he got benched or he might have got injured this past year. But okay, I guess he dealt with injury in this past year, but basically in like the last few games of the year, he did not start. Like he was not out there. So I guess they shut him down because of his injury. And you know, it sucks for a guy, you know, who is playing in his last year in college. You know, you definitely want to be out there and playing your last years at the college level. Well, he didn't get that opportunity and his draft stock definitely took a dive because of that. His draft stock tanked. He went from like being I literally remember like before the start of the college football season, they were saying he might be one of the first quarterbacks taken in the draft, and he ends up being the last quarterback taken in the draft, seventh round, and. You know, that's tough for him. And I did see a video of him getting his call that he was getting drafted and, you know, a lot of emotion for him in front of his family. I bet it was really painful to go through those first 7 rounds and not hear your name when you were projected to be a top guy before the college football season. So I'm telling you, that's just the kind of way that college football goes. Like you can go from being a top guy to barely being drafted the very next year, just depending on how your year goes. You know, just ask Carson Beck. You know, guys like that. So it's very interesting to see him go. I'm glad he got a shot. He gets drafted by the Chiefs. The Chiefs QB room has obviously Patrick Mahomes leading the way, but they just signed Justin Fields over from the Jets. So Justin Fields is getting his own shot with the Chiefs. And then they have Oladokun, Chris Oladokun, who was an interesting story himself because I believe he came over from like the UFL or the XFL, one of the other pro football leagues. And then they also have Jake Hayner. So Jake Hayner was out of Fresno State, I believe, last year. So the Chiefs are having a interesting QB room, a lot of competition behind Patrick Mahomes. Gardner Minshew moved on. So, you know, they got Chris Oladokun and Justin Fields now competing with Garrett Nussmeier. So we'll see who makes the roster. And shout out to Garrett for getting a shot. Now, the last quarterback or the last two quarterbacks, I guess, I want to talk about and are very interesting stories right now as we see my boy, Diego Pavia. Yes, Diego Pavia is getting his shot in the NFL. Diego Pavia went undrafted in the draft. Very unfortunate, you know, especially because he was a Heisman finalist. He literally was like the runner-up in the Heisman, and he went completely undrafted, which has basically never been seen before at that level. You know, I mean, it makes sense though because it's tough to say, you know, because we have seen guys like Kyler Murray get drafted in the last few drafts, and Kyler Murray went number 1 overall. So, you know, and Kyler Murray is about the same height as Diego Pavia. But, you know, what kills Diego Pavia is that he's 5'10" and 207. He's a small guy. He's a small guy. You can see it on the screen when he's playing. He balled out of his mind at Vanderbilt. Obviously, Vanderbilt has been a very cool Cinderella story themselves, kind of like Indiana. They have resurrected their football program in the last few years, and Diego Pavia was a big part of that. Diego Pavia had quite the story going from he was like at a community college, and then he went over to a military college, and then he transferred to New Mexico State, and then he finally got to Vanderbilt, and he beat Alabama, which was one of the craziest things we ever saw. And he was just a big part of Vanderbilt's success the past couple years. So Heisman runner-up. I mean, he almost won a Heisman Trophy. Like, this guy was a stud in college. But like I said early on in the video, just because you're great at the college level doesn't always translate to the NFL level, especially at a position like quarterback. It's just really tough. Just look at Tim Tebow. You know what I mean? Tim Tebow, one of the greatest college quarterbacks we've ever seen. You know, they didn't even want to draft him in the draft because they didn't think he had what it took. And they knew early on that, he probably wasn't the guy, and his, NFL career obviously did not turn out to be the greatest. So it's tough to see the guys that, we're rooting for in college, not make it to the NFL, but that's just the reality of things. Diego Pavia gets his shot though. He goes undrafted, but he just got signed by the Ravens. It was interesting because the Ravens just invited him to minicamp a couple days ago, and then just like a couple days later, they signed him to a 3-year deal, by the way. 3-year deal for an undrafted player. That's pretty unheard of because if you know, like, contracts and things with the draft picks, usually like the 6th round and 7th round draft picks only get like a 1-year, 2-year deal, because usually it's like, you got to prove it to us that you can play at this level. You know what I mean? Uh, Especially for an undrafted guy to get a 3-year deal, like, off rip, is pretty crazy. So shout out to Diego Pavia for making it at the end. At the end of the day, there was a lot of controversy surrounding him in the draft process. Obviously, he did some things off the field that did not did not help his draft stock, probably hurt him. Not saying he would have got drafted anyway, because really it's just the height. It's not like Diego Pavia is 6'5". If he was 6'5", I don't think there would be a question. He definitely would have got drafted. But he's 5'10", and then on top of that, he was doing some interesting things off the field. He said some things that he probably regrets now, that went around the media. So, not really surprising to me to see him go undrafted. But I'm glad he's getting a shot at the Ravens. And then, speaking of the Ravens, they're not only signing him, but they're also signing Joe Fagnano. I don't want to say his name like that, but it's Fagnano. I don't know. It seems like Italian, but quarterback out of Connecticut also got signed to the Ravens. He also went undrafted. He was a pretty solid quarterback at Connecticut, and Connecticut actually went 10-2 last year. Very surprising for them because UConn is not a good football school. They went 10-2 under him, and he also goes undrafted, but he also gets signed to the Ravens. So the Ravens are trying to do some things behind Lamar Jackson. I'm not saying anything's going on with Lamar. Interesting to see the situation, but, Lamar is the guy. Absolutely no doubt about that. Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP winner. Tyler Huntley is his backup, who's already a pretty solid backup. So 2 guys there, but they do only have 2 quarterbacks on the roster. So that's probably why they drafted a couple guys, or signed a couple guys. They didn't draft a quarterback, but they signed a couple undrafted guys, Diego Pavia and Joe Fagnano. So shout out to both of those guys who got undrafted and are getting shots in Baltimore behind a couple great quarterbacks there already. And it should be very interesting to see the storyline surrounding Diego Pavia. Hopefully he makes it, man. Hopefully he proves that he belongs in the NFL. And shout out to him. He was I was rooting for him all these past couple seasons. He is a very polarizing player, very fun player to watch. And then, just to run through some names that some of us college football fans might recognize who were undrafted and maybe will get a chance in the NFL. Shout out to all these guys who, their NFL dreams may have fallen short for now, but maybe they'll get a shot. Luke Altmaier out of Illinois. Sawyer Robinson out of Baylor. Joey Aguilar out of Tennessee. Haynes King out of Georgia Tech, who's just a dog, by the way. Haynes King was one of the most fun guys to watch in college at Georgia Tech. I mean, this guy is like, he's a white boy, but he's like Tim Tebow. He's like a reincarnation of Tim Tebow. He's running down your throat, no stopping him. So, Haynes King, shout out to him. Hopefully he gets a shot somewhere to do something. I feel like Haynes King could play a different position at the NFL. He could maybe be like a tight end or something. Shout out Haynes King, representing the ATL. Like I said, Joe Fagnano and Diego Pavia undrafted. They both got signed already. Jalen Daniels out of Kansas. He was a pretty fun player to watch in college. Pretty fun down there at Kansas. Mark Gronowski, who came over from South Dakota State. He went to Iowa. He goes undrafted. Miller Moss out of Louisville, who transferred from USC and kind of had a falling off. Kyron Drones out of Virginia Tech. And then Braylon Braxton out of Southern Miss. So shout out to all those guys for great college careers. Hopefully they get a shot in the NFL. But that will wrap up the quarterbacks in the NFL draft. So we'll see who pans out, who becomes a star in the league, who becomes a starter, who, manages to hold on to a roster spot, and then maybe guys that you'll never see their names again, unfortunately. So very interesting to see the quarterbacks every year for me. And then in this next episode, I'm going to talk about some my favorite draft picks in this next episode. Different positions, but not just like first round guys, like guys that were very good at the NFL, or excuse me, at the college level and got their shot in the NFL different rounds. So we will see and tune in. And thank you very much for watching.